This is a circular polarizer. It is a fantastic little filter to have for your digital camera because it will cut down reflections and glares and allow you to get some really stunning images. And it works really good for any kind of reflective surface, car windows, lakes, riverbeds, skies, leaves. I mean, it does a really good job on a wide variety of things. But what happens if you forgot it? Or what happens if you've rotated your camera and forgot to adjust it? Because you do have to turn these things in order to get the desired effect. And as soon as you rotate your camera, all of a sudden it's not doing what it's supposed to anymore. You have to adjust it again in order to get it. And then when you go back to, you know, your landscape orientation or horizontal orientation, all of a sudden it needs to be adjusted again. So it's very easy to forget. And are all of those photos ruined? Let's say you went on a whole shoot and didn't really look that closely at the back of your camera when you're taking the photos and completely missed that your polarizer maybe wasn't on or wasn't adjusted properly. Are those photos just completely ruined? A lot of people might say yes, but there are a lot of ways that we can recover some of that detail in those highlights from the reflections. It's not 100%, and there's different tools to accomplish different things, but we're going to take a look at all of them today and see if we can somehow get to a point where having the circular polarizer is not like a must-have, and you can do it without it. So stick with me today, and we're going to go through that here on this episode of my channel. So grab yourself a big cup of coffee, sit down, and we're going to talk about editing photos in your landscape. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniel Allen. I'm a landscape photographer and a portrait photographer based out of the Seattle area. And I do these YouTube videos in my spare time to try and help share what I know and, get some information out there for other photographers who, are looking for some advanced skills for photo editing. My background is more on the photo editing side of things. I'm a very strong photographer, but I definitely love the editing aspect of photography. So I want to try and share some of the advanced tips that I have. And a lot of the stuff that I found online is not necessarily super advanced. A lot of it is geared towards more novices and people who are just starting out. But I want to take you guys to the next step so that you can really hone your skills and get to the place that you want to be with your photos. So with that all said, let's take a look at this photo in Lightroom. This is one of those shots, and this is 100% raw. Don't judge. It's not the greatest shot in the world. But I took it trying to see if there was a good composition there. And then after I was done realizing, oh, I didn't adjust my CPL, my circular polarizer. So then I took it a second time, and this is what it looks like with the circular polarizer. See what the differences are. So the leaves have a lot more specular highlights on them. They're just really blown out. Same with the moss. The moss is a little better in the version with the circular polarizer compared to without it. But primarily, I'm looking here at these leaves. There's just a huge difference in the leaves. The one without the circular polarizer, you can really see that those leaves are glistening and wet and glaring back at us. And so how would we try to recover something like this? So I'm glad you asked, because there is a couple things that we can try and do. In Lightroom, so let's take a look at Lightroom. The general issue that we have here, the problem that we're having is that these highlights typically are washed out significantly. If we bring down our highlights and look at the specular highlights here, the reflections in the leaves, we can see that it kind of just grays them up. It doesn't really have much saturation to it. So we can try, and let's take a brush, and I'm gonna have the flow at 100%. Feather, I'm just gonna keep the feather kind of mild because I'm not really worried that much about the feather here, because I'm going to use a mask to try and recover some of these. So let's turn on the selected mask overlay here so we can see exactly where we're masking off. And it's really important that to try and get as much recovery of highlights done in Lightroom as you can before you bring it over into Photoshop. Because if you bring over something that is completely blown out and there's just no detail in there whatsoever, because Lightroom, when it takes it into Photoshop, is going to convert it into a TIFF format, and the TIFF format is, you're going to be kind of burning in those color values, whatever you bring it in as. So you want to make sure that you're getting as much tonal range as you can before you take it into Photoshop, because you'll lose whatever detail is in those blown out areas if you don't. So, so here we have kind of masked out some of these leaves a little bit, and let's take a look at some of the things we can do. I'm going to, first of all, set the range mask to luminance and show the luminance mask, and we're going to just focus on the really bright areas here. And we'll adjust the smoothness. Want to feather it a little bit, but we really want to try and dial in on those extreme highlights. All right, let's try that. We might need to adjust it a little bit here in a minute, but let's take a look and see if we can get this to work. So let's try dropping the exposure here. And we can see it really doesn't do what we want. It just kind of muddies everything up. We need to try and maybe decrease the highlights. And that kind of works. Obviously our masking is not quite what it should be. So we can try and play with that a bit more. To dial in exactly what should work, but I can already tell you that this is not going to work very well for us. We can even try and add a little bit of a color to it to try and, because when we're decreasing the luminosity of those highlights, there's no color there, and so it's not able to actually give us a color. It's just kind of a muddy, kind of gray look to it. And we can do something like this. And add some color back into it. So first of all, we'll dial in whatever color it should be, which I think is like right about here. So you can click on here and then drag it out into your image and then select any color from in here, so you can match it properly. So that's a handy little trick there. I knew there was a way to do it. I couldn't think of what it was. And play with the range just a little bit. Try and get this right. And there you go. That's actually not terrible. I tried this on my own before I did tried recording this, and you know, I couldn't really get it very good. So this is actually a better result than I had when I was trying it on myself. So let's do a before and after here so you can see it. So that's a before, there's an after. It's actually not terrible. But again, the problem comes in, you're gonna have to go and mask in everywhere that you want done like this. And that can be quite tedious. Although I'm the first one to say that good photo editing takes time, and it's not just a quick little button you can press to make it all look fantastic. I have very rarely ever seen a photo that turned out any good where just a simple mask was applied to it or a simple filter was applied to it. The other downfall to doing this is, so we've got the ferns here, but we would have to do something probably different for the moss. Just because it's a different tonal range, it's a different color that we'd want to be backfilling into it. Obviously, you'd probably want to take your time here, but I'm just going to really quickly just kind of paint this in so we can get a feel for it. There. We'll turn that off and turn it back on again. It's not terrible. It's probably a little much, so perhaps we can collapse this down and then do the effect amount. Kind of dial that in a little bit so it's not so noticeable and so strong. Yeah, there we go. And just so you can see how it's done, let's do a new filter here that is specifically targeting just the moss. Again, I'm going to draw this in real quick. And I'm using my mouse here instead of a pen. Tablet. There's some moss over here too. We'll come back later for all of that. I'm going to zoom in real quick and maybe clean this up a little bit. There. And some of this will be taken care of with the luminosity masking anyways. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that now. I might not need to change much. So let's go ahead and dial this back. That's actually looking pretty good right there. So I'm going to turn off the overlay preview. Let's turn down the highlights. And that's not too bad right there. I'm still going to add a little bit of color to it just because I think it could deal with it. So again, I'm clicking in here and I'm dragging out to here to try and match the different color. Whatever colors I think are going to look good with it. And I'm just keeping the mouse button pressed as I drag around. And it's updating it real time as I do it. So down here is a little bit more muted. Up here would be a little bit stronger and warm. Let's see, over here was more of a green, darker green color. I think I'm going to actually go with more of a custom color because I remember when I shot this, it was a really warm patch of moss. It was really kind of golden and yellow. So it looked more like that, which, you know, it looks really good. So I'm going to put that in there. Let's see, a little bit of moss in here. So just real quickly, I'm drawing this in. There we go. And like I said, you're going to want to probably take your time on this and really kind of fine tune where you're laying down this filter. But you can already kind of see just kind of a general difference here, an overall difference in the ferns in the front and the moss in the background. It's already looking tons better. So there's a lot that you can do here just within Lightroom. But let's look at some other ways that we can do it as well. I'm going to go ahead and reset all of this. There we go. And let's open it up in Photoshop. I'm going to open it up as a smart filter or a smart object because that is my favorite thing to do here. Okay, the first thing we're going to try here is I'm going to make a few copies of this actually. So I'm going to do Control J a few times, create copies. Because we're going to try some different techniques with these. So I'm going to do a Control G to put this into a group, and we're going to call this one the darken approach. And one of the things that we're going to do is try to darken those highlights by doing a simple overlay. We're going to set this to the darken mode on the layer, and we're going to zoom in nice and close here. I know people say don't pixel peep, which is what we're doing here, but I'm doing this for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to sample this color right here, and if you haven't, this is something I forget sometimes, so I have to make sure I remind you as well as myself. Click on this eyedropper tool every once in a while and just double check that you have 3x3 or 5x5 as your average here, because if you need to ever get super specific and just do a single pixel color selection, it can totally screw you up moving forward. So it's a good idea to just kind of check that every now and then. And I'm going to drop this flow down to maybe well, I'm going to, for the sake of speed, I'm going to do 25%, just so we can actually have this go somewhat fast. And I'm going to select one of these colors over here and try darkening. Now, we don't want to use a normal, the normal layer style, because if we did that, we would have just green haze that we were painting. So we need to try and do some kind of mode that will not change the details and just kind of affect the aspect of it. So in this case, we're trying to darken these with some color, so the darken mode would be ideal. There's also multiply. Multiply is not bad. I think it's a little much, but we can always dial that back too. Maybe darken's a better way to go here. But we're going to try and just do this real quick. And you can see this is going to take a lot of time to do, because you have to manually go through and paint all of these by hand. And you know, I've said it before, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have to spend a lot of time editing. It'd actually be very therapeutic. I find that when I do these really complex image editing projects, it's just almost meditative. You just sit here and some people say that coloring a picture is really meditative. For me, this is kind of like coloring a picture. So it's just a picture I took. So that can be really relaxing and meditative for some people, myself included, to just go through and just mindlessly do this sort of stuff. But I don't want to take a whole ton of your time while I do this, because it's going to be horribly boring. But you can see that we can capture back a lot of this detail by doing it this way. If you want to try and if you don't want to try and speed this up a little bit, what you can do is try and target the luminosity values. I have the TK7 panel here, and the TK7 panel will allow me to, as soon as it loads, I've noticed this one's a little bit slower. It'll allow me to just do a luminosity mask really quickly. And I've always been a huge fan of the TK panels. I know there's others out there, but the TK just works really well for me. So I'll pick like this color here, this range of number 2 lights mask, and set it to a selection. Now, if you're not familiar with TK, this little red dotted line on the top means that it is currently active and an active selection. And if we can actually turn that on and off. There must not be a whole lot selected. I can't really see any. Anyways, So now, if we just start painting, and raise my brush size because now it can be little less accurate because I have a selection that's masking it out. And that's actually not doing that great. So we probably don't want to do that. It was actually doing much better before we did the Luminosity Mask. So we can try one more time, I suppose. And let's just do that one more time. Yeah, this whole automated way of doing it is just not working all that well. So, you know, if you want to do, I'm going to do a Control D here and make sure nothing is selected anymore. Yep, see, it's no more selections. You know, hand painting it was working pretty well for me. That might be the best way to go. But there's other ways that we can look at too. So let's move on from this. And we'll throw this one into a group. And we're going to look at this example. We're going to try doing it with curves. All right, so in this curves folder, we're going to, I bet you can guess what we're going to do. We're going to add a curve. And before we do that, I am actually going to do a luminosity mask again, using the TK actions. You can do it also with the channels. So you could take the RGB value and you can hold your control key and click on it, and that will give you basically a luminosity mask. So this is, if we come back over here to layers and delete this, delete layer mask, and we'll create a new layer mask. This will actually default with the mask that we just selected from the channels. So that's our default lights mask. From here, if you wanted to do a darks mask, you could actually go and do adjustments. You could invert. So this would be the darks mask, or you can, you know, apply curves or levels to it. So let's say, well, for me specifically, this is actually too broad of a luminance range. So I'm going to want to drag this up to try and limit how much of that area, the bright area, we're exposing in this curve. So this hopefully is a little bit better representation of the luminance values that we're trying to target. So we're going to say okay here. And when we come into the curve, first thing we want to do is try and reduce the brightness. And I'm going to take this dot all the way on the far left. I'm going to drop it down, try and lower the vibrance, lower the luminosity of those highlight areas. And I'm going to kind of pull this up just a little bit. We can see on the graph kind of what is being represented. The interesting thing about your tone curves, when you have a mask applied, the tone curve will reflect whatever visible area is in the mask. So if we disable this mask and come back to here, oh, I don't actually. That's not doing that. Let's create a new curve. So this is what the curve looks like without a mask. This is what the curve looks like with a mask. So you can see that it's representative of the visible tonal areas in that are visible in the mask. So kind of help you see, have a little bit visual representation of you know, what you might maybe need to, how you need to target some of these to get the effect that you want. So that's not bad, but you can kind of see that it's that's actually probably a little bit too it's probably affecting too wide of an area, but you can also see that it's kind of, it's darkened those highlights, but it's also muddied them up a little bit. So we're going to come in here, we're going to change that. We're going to, in the highlights area, we're going to add some green, and just by dragging this over to the left, and probably add some, it's actually more yellow than anything else, believe it or not, which is, if you're an experienced photographer, you realize that a lot of the green that we see in our photos is actually yellow. It's very strange, but that's true. So little of what we see in foliage is actually yellow, or excuse me, green. So we're going to get more bang for our buck by dropping down this yellow slider, and see, we can go really low with it because of the way that we have this filter running. You know, it's targeting right quite nicely, actually. So there's without, there's with, before and after. It is probably a little bit too much, so let's pull it back. Well, it's only too much in some areas. And we can also add some magenta or, excuse me, cyan coming to the red channel. Add a little bit of cyan, possibly. I'm not entirely sure that that looks very good, but yeah, I think I'm going to leave that alone. Probably going to come back into this green, though, and there. And RGB, maybe even drop it just a little bit more. See, we want to make sure that we're still keeping contrast in the highlight area. That's where having that curve really helps. If you flatten it too much, and everything's going to be washed out and look muddy. So you need to have some sort of curve in there to retain some of those some of those details in the highlights, and that's where this curve comes in handy. And you'll find that you know, the more curved it is, the more detail you see. So the more drastic this curve is, I mean, look at all the detail that you see in there. It's a lot of detail. As we start to bring it down more flat, all of a sudden our image starts to flatten out too. It looks really muddy. So the curve is really important. There we go. So that is way too much, but it is actually not doing a terrible job. So it's way too much, and it's everywhere. So we don't want that. I'm actually going to go to the TK panel, and I'm going to do a Lights 2 mask and update it directly into this. See, and that's much better. So a lot less drastic. Do you see the difference there? So before, after. And then, so this one we were targeting the ferns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control G. I'm going to say ferns. And I'm going to Alt click on the mask. And now, with my flow set at 100% on the brush, I'm going to just go ahead and paint in with white everywhere that I want this to show. So down here, right here, and see, we got a little bit carried away up here, so just swap it to black and paint that back with black. There we go. And this just is a really, the reason why I did a nested group is because I wanted to have another level of masking open to me. You can only have one mask per layer, so the only way to have like an additional mask, so I didn't want to mask over the top of my luminosity mask. I wanted to mask what shows from that. So that's why we're going this route. And I'm just kind of really quickly doing this. You'll definitely want to spend way more time than I am on your images. But here we go. And then after we're done here, we're going to go back and do another one for just the moss. So zoom out here real quick, do a before and after. Much better already. So here is the other one that we're going to do. Again, I'm going to pick a we'll stick with the lights 2, and I'm going to apply that directly to the curve that I was just working with, and we're going to zoom in. And again, I'm using the TK, but you guys can use whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable doing. There are lots of ways of doing luminosity masks. So first off, let me get rid of this here. We need to darken this way. Here we go. So I'm going to drag down the overall highlights to where I want, and then I'm going to increase contrast by doing this, by adding a curve to it. And like I mentioned in the last one, the more drastic the curve is, the more detail you're going to be, bringing out in those highlights. For this one, for the moss, we already know that it has more yellow than anything else, so I'm gonna add a bunch of yellow by dropping this blue filter in the highlights, and we're going to also do a little bit of green, not a ton, but some. And maybe that's a little too much. There. And again, we're going to Control G, call this one Moss. Press the Alt key and the mask button to create a negative mask. And now with a white brush set at 100% flow, we're going to go and mask in the moss, so to reveal the changes that we wanted to do with it. Now there's some areas it's doing pretty good overall. There are some areas where it's not the greatest. So like this part I just did here, there's really no detail in there, and I don't think there's much of any way around that, unfortunately, just because the detail is gone. It's either part of the image that the image capture is actually that way. We'd have to go back into Lightroom and look and see if that was just something we missed, or if it's if we, sometimes you can go back into Lightroom and recover those details and then re-import it and just kind of do it like a composite kind of thing, where you just composite in that part because the details were lost, almost like an HDR stack, but not quite. I'm going to increase the softness a little bit. It's a little hard on the edges for my liking. Let's come in here, do this. And I can't stress it enough, when you're doing yours, please take your time. I am rushing this just because this is a video. And I don't want you guys getting bored. So, there we go. And if we zoom out and take a closer look, here is the before on the moss, and here is the after. That, you know, really looks fantastic. Here's all the curve adjustments together, before and after. It's not as good as what the polarizer does, but for all intents and purposes, it's actually pretty darn good. So, so that's good. I would still probably want to come back and do another one of these curves that is aimed at the brush here, and that would, you know what, I'm going to just go ahead and do it just real quick, because, I mean, at this point we've got it down to a science, don't we? So I'm going to just throw that in a group right now, and we're going to call this branches. And for this one, again, we're going to go with the TK. I'm going to do lights 2 adjustment. Put that over to my mask, and you know what? There we go. We got to move this up to here. There. And for this one, so we're going to be looking just at the dead branches, the dead ferns. We're going to drop down the luminosity here, and once we get it to kind of where we think we want it, we're going to add a curve to it, retain the details in that in those highlights, and ignore everything else. We're just looking at the branches and stuff. Pretty good. Let's go into the red. We're going to add some red into the highlights here. So add some red. Let's see, the opposite of green's magenta. We're going to add a little bit of magenta, see if we like that. Yeah. You know, magenta is just one of those colors I don't like adding to my photos. In fact, I try to get rid of it whenever I see it. Add a little yellow, possibly. Let's see. Yeah, a little bit. I don't think a little bit won't hurt. In fact, to combat the magenta just a bit, I think I'm going to add a little green. No, am I? I can't tell. It does kind of add a little bit of a richness to it. All right, we'll do that. So if we come back here to the RGB channel, we can see that we've got a nice kind of curved selection here, a nice little curve of the tonal ranges of those highlights. Yeah, there we go, perfect. And then I'm going to hold the Alt key while I click on the mask and on the group. So now we have all of those effects hidden, and lost my pen for a minute. And then we're going to go ahead and paint in the effect here on the branches. Now, this could become a masking nightmare. The way that all these branches kind of intertwine over the top of the green that we've already done. You know, this could take a long time to actually do. So I'm not going to go through and do all of it, just because that would take too much time on this video. But we can kind of see here in this one area what it would look like, and it doesn't look too shabby, frankly. It looks pretty darn good. Now, mind you, again, this only works as good as it does because we took the time to do a luminance mask first. So all we are showing are the areas of the luminance mask that we want revealed. And thankfully that kind of hides most of the stuff that we don't want revealed. If we didn't have that luminance mask, then the masking of this would take us so much more time. And you can kind of tell that even on the areas, like if I make a mistake and accidentally go over some of this moss here, it doesn't actually look that terrible. You know, that's okay. So you can kind of, you know, speed through this a little bit, again, thanks to the luminance mask, but you want to try and, you know, be mindful of what you're painting in, just so you're getting the results that you want. Okay, I'm gonna just call that good. This whole area over here probably needs to be worked on more, but so that's what the branches layer turned off and then on. You can see that it really actually does a fantastic job. So, and then let's take one last look at the overall curves. So here's before, and then here's after. That, my friends, is actually a pretty darn good approximation of what a circular polarizer would do. You can arguably work on the sky a little bit more if you wanted to. Like, let's add one more. Gotta move this up here. Here we go. Call this sky. Add it to a group. Call that sky. And in the sky, so we're going to open up the TK actions again, and I'm going to try and get as narrow to the sky. Well, actually, lights too. It's pretty much lights too for everything. So let's apply that mask to the curves. And we're going to do the same thing as before, darken, and add contrast. And we definitely want to just try and stay focused on the sky as much as possible. Be careful when you're pulling down that you don't accidentally pull over too. That will flatten you out in your highlights and you'll lose detail. So you want to make sure that this slider here is all the way over to the right. There we go. We have a lot of tonal range here in this little spike, so it's a good idea to make sure that we are adding contrast up to that point, so the curve is really pronounced throughout that entire area. And then let's try and get as good of a sky color as we can. We'll add a little bit of blue. A little bit of blue. You definitely want to add cyan. And we don't really want any magenta or green. So we'll leave that alone. And let's invert that. Come grab our brush and paint in this blue darkened sky. Now, the thing about the skies is they're very rarely ever what we expect them to be. They're very rarely ever bright blue like this. Usually they are blown out, or they have graduated colors in them. So they're, ooh, that was a little much. Let's not do that. Graduated colors in them. They typically start like dark blue in the top and then they go lighter as they go down, or sometimes in reverse, but I don't think that's very, that's more like sunrise versus sunset kind of thing. But so, you know, there's that. We can play with the opacity a little bit to try and adjust how much of it is visible. So, you know, while this much might seem quite fake, we can actually come down to like 60% here, and that looks a lot better. So, yeah, that looks way better. So there we go, total before and then after. As you can see, it's not a one-touch solution, a one-click solution. You can't just come in here and say, oh, I want all of my color and details back. It doesn't work like that. There's another way that I tried that I'm going to share with you guys here real quick. I'm going to put this into a group, and I'm going to turn this on and make a copy of it. And the reason there's one way you can try and do this is to you can automate it with a blur. So come in here. Let's do Gaussian Blur. And specifically, you want to try and get it so there are no details left. You don't want details, you just want colors. Color ranges, you know. And let's say that's okay for right now. And we're going to darken and bring down the opacity quite a bit. And then we're also, let's turn this off first, and then we'll do a quick little luminance mask here. We'll do, let's do 2. That seems to have worked really well. And, you know, there you have it. It's kind of a one-click solution, but at the same time, it really kind of looks like a one-click solution. You know, because we've just basically blurred. That's all we've done. You can try and darken this as well. So we can add like let's add an exposure, and we'll clip it to this blurred one here, and then we'll darken. You know, we'll try and darken the blurred. It doesn't work very good. We can try adding a curve. Again, clip it to what's underneath, and you know, just try and, again, we want to add a curve as much as possible. It just doesn't work very good. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work. So I did try that. Limited success. Kind of works, not really. But like, if you're in a pinch and you need to get something done fast, you know, it's better than nothing. Lastly, though, I'm going to show you my favorite. So there is actually a fantastic filter in Luminar that will it takes care of most. It takes care of most of the highlights. So we're going to come in here. If you have Luminar 4, you're going to open up Luminar 4 and go into it. And this honestly is my favorite filter to use with Luminar 4. And I really like doing my filters on smart objects almost exclusively, just because I can go back and change the settings later. So if I decide that maybe there was too much of this effect or too little, or I needed to change a value of some sort, I can go back in and change it, and you know, it's not destructive. So if you have like a rasterized layer that's basically, you know, just a bitmap or a TIFF or whatever, and you apply a filter to it directly, it's changing those pixels, and it's destructive. So you can't get that back unless you know, are still in the same session and you do an undo step and go back in your history or whatever. But once you've saved it, and can't come back later and undo that. So that's why it's always best, in my opinion, to do it on a smart object if possible. The feature that I wanted to show you is here in the pro section, and it is advanced contrast. So they have this nifty little slider here called the highlights contrast, and when you bring this down, it almost acts like a CPL filter. So it will muddy it quite a bit if you're not careful. So like if we zoom in here and look closely, you know, some of the details in here are getting kind of muddied a little bit. You can adjust the highlights balance a little bit so that more or less is showing, and sometimes that helps. But you know, more often than not, I found that just having the highlights balance at the same spot, and then you know, coming in here and just, so like for the moss, for example, the moss is probably good at 100%, just because look at that, it looks fantastic, very realistic. So we would come in here and I would do a brush and fill the mask, and then you can invert the mask. I don't know why you can't just invert it right off the top, but you can't. And then come in here and paint it in. And we paint it in. There we go. Right, maybe have the opacity up a little higher, because I know I like that effect on the moss, so I'll just paint everywhere here on the moss. Luminar actually just did an update on this today that I just installed, and this whole like the red mask as you paint, that's all new. It didn't used to do that. I am not sure if I like it yet, but you know what, it's okay. Like I said, this software has become such an indispensable part of my workflow. I mean, they would have to really mess it up for me to change off of it. So here we go. Mask is, we're just doing the moss here. There we go. And look at the before and the after. Before, after. We can actually probably come in here and do some of this here as well. There were some parts that didn't look very good, but how did the ferns look? Let's look at the ferns real quick. So if we do that, let's look at the before and after. Before and after. Definitely does a great job there. So and now we're off the masking. You know, this is a very new software platform still. and it's got some growing pains. Like you just saw there, it got out of the mask editing mode, which I didn't want it to do. I wanted it to stay in mask editing mode. But you know, it's still a new software package, and they are pushing out new updates all the time, so it's going to get better. I have no doubt. And I'm just going to kind of brush everywhere here, just for the sake of showing you. There we go. We'll do down here a little bit. And like I've said a million times in this video already, take your time when you're editing and masking this stuff out. I think it's important for YouTubers like me to say that constantly, because we're speeding through it. We're rushing through. I've spent several days working on a single photo before, and if I was to try and do a YouTube video showing you everything I did to work on that photo, I mean, I wouldn't be able to upload it. You know, it would just be way too long. It'd be a couple days worth. So, you know, to some extent, you know, we have to rush through this, but you know, take your time. The more time you spend on it, the better the results in general. So here's before, here's after. You know what? I think it looks amazing. This, like I said, this is one of my favorite software products at the moment. You know, if you find that you need to, so there's some areas that need a little bit more, you can add a second adjustment layer. So this is your layers panel up here. So click on layers, it says layers. We're going to add another layer. It's going to say what kind of layer. I want to add a new adjustment layer. So now we're in the adjustment layers. We can come back over to here, and let's go ahead and crank this back up again. You can do as much of this as you want, you know. Of course, it's going to look ridiculous at some point, but you know, you can do as much as you want. So we're going to say we'll do that. We'll go back in and brush. Let's see, invert. Nope, it doesn't work. You have to fill it first. There we go. I thought maybe they'd fix that on this version, but they haven't. And see, this is another thing I don't like. They reset your brushes every single time you come into here. So I'm not a fan of the way that they show the mask every time you do a brush stroke. I think that's really distracting. I hope that there's a way of turning that off. This is the first time I've used it since I've updated it, so I don't know if there's a way of turning that off or not. Too often people do like usability studies, and they find that people are like, oh yeah, it'd be really cool if it did this or if it did that, and then come to find out that no, that's just them. The rest of us don't want that, you know? And so they go and they force it on the rest of us, and we're just like, what the hell? Why'd you do that? Why? No, why? For real, why? So I'm just going to come in here and add a little more something. Give it a little bit more pizzazz. There we go. So that's this layer. So before, after, very subtle, but it's definitely there. I'm going to raise the opacity because I think it needs a little bit more. And again, I'm going so fast through here. Take your time, please. Take your time when you're doing these edits. But I'm just trying to rush for the sake of this video. Sorry if I sound like a broken record with that, but like I said, there's a lot of people out there will watch these YouTube videos and see somebody just cranking through it like this and expect that theirs will turn out like that as well. And it's like, no. Actually, you remember Bob Ross? It reminds me of Bob Ross a little bit. Little happy waterfalls, little happy trees, happy this, happy that. And he made it look so easy, but you know, people didn't see the hours of work that, you know, the years of work and experience behind it, so that he knew exactly how to hold the brush and how to hold the trowel, the paint trowel and stuff, to chisel in the branches and the rocks and all this other stuff. He made it look so easy, and it was for him, but you know, the rest of us, it's not that easy for. So there's the befores and afters. It looks really good, I think. Here's an overall before and after. So that's the original with no CPL. There it is with the CPL. And you know, a lot of times I like to come in here and put an Orton effect on. So I'll drag the Orton effect. That also kind of helps to cut out a lot of the specular highlights, because if we get in here and look really closely, what the Orton effect is doing is it's kind of blurring. And it's like that one example I did back in Photoshop where we blurred and used a blurred overlay to try and recover some of those details and then darkened it. That's a little bit of what the Orton effect does. So Orton effect also works really great for getting rid of specular highlights. You do have to be careful because you'll do a lot of clipping, as we see here. So all those blue areas that you see right there are clips. Areas of the photo where it's so dark that there is no shadow information. So we can raise that up and kind of minimize that a bit. But you know, you're a little bit limited. So probably, you know, if I was going to do a full editing cycle on this photo, I probably would try and equalize out a lot of that shadow before bringing it into Luminar. That's typically my MO, if you will, is to kind of raise those shadows up, because I do know that my processing in Luminar will darken those shadows quite a bit. So this right here is not too bad. And if we say apply and bring it back out to Photoshop, it is a little muddy. It looks like it's a little muddy in some of these greens, but you know, we can kind of filter some of that out. Here we are, and it's going to load it as a filter here in a second. Yeah, so you can actually come in here and kind of reduce. You can let's see, let's take a flow of like 10%, 9%, whatever, and invert this, and we'll just kind of paint it away from some areas that we think it's too much. You know, maybe it's a little too much in there, a little too much in there, maybe a little too much up in here. So, you know, we can kind of selectively show what we think, you know, is necessary. I'm going to add this to another group, call this one Luminar. And then I do want to add a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. And I'm going to try and minimize some of these greens just a little bit. They're just a little too much. Way oversaturated. And the cyans, I'm going to actually I'm going to slide those to the left a little. Oh, why are I thought that was cyan up there. Huh, I guess it's not. And let's see, yellows. We can either brighten the yellows, which I always like to go extreme like this because it shows you exactly what is being affected. A lot of times you don't know, you know, especially if the changes you make are really subtle. You might not know what changes are getting made. So I'm going to boost the yellows just a little bit. And then I think I'm going to come to the reds, and I'm going to cut some of the reds just a little bit. Actually, quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. There we go. So here we have before, after, before, after. It just kind of helps to tame it down just a little bit. All right, so once again, here we are with, this is the original. Let's take a look at everything that we've tried so far in Photoshop. So this is the original. Here we have the darken method, which is just here in the ferns. So, and that was not the greatest approach, but it does help if you remember right. It does help if you take your time masking that out and painting deliberately in the areas that you want. Here's the curve approach. Curve approach, really natural looking result, really subtle. I like it, but you have to make sure that you are targeting the different colors. So if you remember right, we had to target the moss separate from the leaves or ferns, separate from the branches and foliage, and then we had to mask those out even more. So quite a long process, but you have a lot of control. So you can, you have a lot of finite control over how this method looks. This one, I didn't write a name for it. Oh, that was the blur version. So trying to do a Gaussian blur and then darkening it. You know, like I said, it's sometimes the one-click solution is what we need. And if you know you find yourself in need of a one-click solution that will do it fast and somewhat believably, you know, maybe that's the one for you. So doing Gaussian blur, and remember we blurred this image, set the mode to darken. The normal version of it was like, well, then we have to probably, there we go. So we blurred the image and then set the mode to darken, or multiply would also work. It just depends how drastic you want. So we can even go multiply here. Before, after, there we go. And last but not least, one of my personal favorites is Luminar here. You know, it's really great. I could spend more time in Luminar, really fine-tuning the look that I want. But I think it does a fantastic job of recovering some of those specular highlights that in the reflections that you lost because you didn't have a CPL attached to it. So yeah, I guess to summarize, after doing this little exercise for myself and sharing it with you guys, I guess I'm not quite as worried about making sure that I have a circular polarizer with me, because there's ways of recovering it, particularly if you don't blow out the highlights too much. You can recover a lot of detail from in there. And of course, a lot of this is going to depend on what kind of camera you have, what kind of lens you have, and a lot of other factors like the ISO level. Maybe there's just a lot of noise. There's typically not as much noise in highlights, but there can be. So there can be some other factors at play there, but I think it's probably best to try and capture the best image you can straight in camera. But if you can't, and you either haven't adjusted your polarizer filter, you forgot to turn it and adjust it the right way, or you forgot to bring it with you, didn't realize you'd need it, all is not lost. As we've seen here, you can actually recover those highlights actually fairly well. So I don't know, what is your favorite approach? What's the best way that you have found to recover those highlights? Or is there a way that I've presented here in this video that really resonates with you, and you think that it's something that you're going to want to do in your work? And I'd love to see some of the work that you do using one or more of these techniques. So feel free to tag me at Daniel Allen Studio Arts and or Daniel Allen Photography in any of your social media platforms, and I'd love to see what you guys come up with. And that's all I had for you guys today. So if you've really enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want to see any more from me, this sort of photo editing and tips, tricks, and things to get the most out of your photography experience, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so you get notifications when I have new content coming out. And that's everything. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.